Welcome back. We are talking about background checks for school resource officers, and joining us for more are Kurt Lavarello, the Executive Director of the School Safety Advocacy Council, and Anthony Shembri, the former head of Juvenile Justice in Florida. And gentlemen, I welcome you both. Anthony, let me start with you. And what occurs to me is, if you remember back in the 1980s, after the Mariel boat lift, all the Cubans coming over from Cuba, Castro opened up the prisons there, and Miami was forced to hire hundreds and hundreds of police officers to deal with that, and they were so rushed that the proper background checks were not done, and you had an explosion of police corruption in Miami.
Yes. This is, it doesn't confine itself to Miami. The I-Team in Ohio did a study and found that 40 departments in Ohio hired police officers that had been disciplined or fired from other departments. In Arizona, 418 officers had been hired from different departments that had been disciplined. The chief of police in Sacramento can't even talk about it because it violates the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights and their privacy. So now we have a conflict here between an officer's Bill of Rights, what you could say about him and his previous employment.
Right. And so, Kurt, I mean, you saw this coming from a million miles away. You saw the rush that Sarasota undertook, creating its own department and hiring these new officers. And in Manatee's case, it was school guardians, and you thought from the outset it was problematic.
Well, yeah, and I'll preface this, Alan, with saying that, you know, Governor Scott didn't do us any favors in terms of the timelines that were passed on to every school district here in the state of Florida. I've never seen, you know, a statute become a law within, I think, 44 days. And the mandates, aside from the hiring, they had to do assessments, they had to do policies and procedures. When you add that on, I call it the not so perfect storm here, because in addition, you had the arguments going on here locally about school-based policing, the sheriff pulling out. So it was really a situation that was ill-advised to move forward with at the time. I'm a big, a solid supporter of school-based policing and school police departments, but as I told the associate superintendent here on the onset, put the brakes on here, you know, if you can, because you're trying to create a monstrosity of an agency that's going to impact kids in a very short period of time.
And it's not to cast any aspersions on any of the officers that were just hired in Sarasota and the guardians in Manatee. There have been some, as you said in the story, some Google searches bring up some interesting questions, but we did have the case of the guardian in Manatee, as I made reference to, that really had a very bizarre social media presence, which really raised questions about whether a person like that should be in our schools around our kids.
Well, yeah, and you look at just our local other departments. I think Sarasota Police Department said they look to hire somebody. They can maybe average one officer for 30 days. We did 25, 30 officers in maybe 40 days. And I was in Broward County when those Mariel boat lifts took place, and all those officers were screened. They did backgrounds on those officers. They did checks on them. Unfortunately, they weren't good enough, and it led to the problem we had down there when I was working down in Broward County.
Anthony, basically the cat is out of the bag here. These departments and these school districts have been forced to do that. So what do you do after the fact?
Well, I think you got to take the long view. Number one, it's a training problem. In order to be a certified police officer in the state of Florida, you have to go through 680 hours of training. In order to be a beautician, you need 1,400 hours to be a certified beautician. So I'm skeptical about the training that they're going to have to go through. The attraction here is a former police officer can get hired and you don't have to pay him while he's in the police academy. So I'm skeptical across the country, this rush to judgment and this rush to training. I'd like to see what these curriculums look like. That's important too, on how we're training these people.
All right, we have to take a quick break. We are just getting warmed up. Our conversation on SRO background checks will continue after a break. Welcome back. We are talking about background checks for school resource officers, and joining us for more are Kurt Lavarello, the Executive Director of the School Safety Advocacy Council, and Anthony Shembri, the former head of Juvenile Justice in Florida. And Kurt, let me start with you. You know, I mentioned the one case in Manatee County, but as you look around the state, have there been any other incidents so far early in the school year of whether it's guardians or SROs that have been problematic?
Well, there are I saw a couple in the news reports from Broward County. Had one of their guardians removed from campus carrying the wrong gun or something over there. And we're going to see more of them. Again, the whole state is under this mandate there. I was just spoke to one of the majors from the Palm Beach County School Police. As a matter of fact, he'd said that he was contacted by Sarasota County to follow their policies on games that we had another show on, and hiring practices. So I know they're modeling some of their policies here on there, but they have 70 openings over in Palm Beach County, and that may increase to 120. So I think everybody had good intentions here to want to make sure our kids stay safe. I don't think this is anything intentionally. No, everybody wants to keep our kids safe. It's just I have some very deep-rooted concerns when we start knowing that just hiring cops alone is a very critical task. But when we are hiring officers that are going to be working with our children, we want to go that extra step. Absolutely. And I did not like the fact that we're outsourcing that background process, because that puts it on a company that's not even familiar with our state, our hiring practices, our SROs, and it's outsourced to somewhere near Washington, D.C. to come back and tell us whether it's a green light or red light for that officer.
And are are private charter schools using the same companies with the same qualifications as the
it's interesting.
The police department and so forth?
I still run across so many citizens here in the county who don't even know that we have armed civilians in our charter schools here in Sarasota County already. To what degree they've been trained or background checked is anybody's guess. I mean, maybe the school district's done the background checks on them too as well.
And Anthony, you're not only the former head of juvenile justice in Florida, you're a former police commissioner in New York. You are actually the role model for the TV show, The Commish.
You had to get that in, right?
Always I have to get that in. What are the red flags that you see here?
I see background checks. I know it's a rush to judgment, but the background checks are important, because each time you interview someone in a background check, it presents leads. Those leads have to be followed up. So what might look like a 2-month investigation might be a 4-month investigation. I couldn't have said it any better than Kurt when he says one thing for police officers, but once we're looking to protect children, as we did in the Department of Juvenile Justice, the background checks are horrendous. And I've fired many, many people and supported the increasing the time for background checks.
But the Sarasota school police chief did say that in addition to the background checks, they are also doing lie detector tests, which would get at some of your big concerns about bringing in people who are going to be around children. I would imagine that's another layer of security or investigation. But does that, is everybody doing it the same way?
It all helps, whether it's a background checks and a lie detector test, things of that sort. It all helps to get to the truth of the background. What kind of, is the person trying to conceal anything?
And again, we don't want to cast aspersions to all the fine men and women that have already been hired here, but obviously both of you have concerns about what possibly could happen in the future, and that begs the question, what do we do now? I mean, the law is the law. And school districts around the state are struggling right now to find enough people qualified to hire them in the first place. So do we stop the process?
No, I'm sorry. I believe that the sheriff's offices around the state should look at their tables of organization. Some of them suffer from the wedding cake table of organization. I think they can cannibalize some of their units and support some of these things for now until their men are relieved with proper officers that have gone through a lengthy background check.
Right. So Kurt, we're going to have a new legislative session that's starting up in January. If you were to make a recommendation to state legislators and to the new governor, whoever that might be, in terms of fixing this one thing, what would it be?
Well, I think you have to mandate certain components of the background check. Right now, the only thing that was mandated that I know of in the current law, the 7026, which has become more popular as the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, was the requirement for the psychological screening. But that can take on many different forms. It can be something as a 2-hour sit-in with a psychologist, all the way up to a full screening. Like when I was hired as an officer over in Palm Beach, it took, you know, about a full day and a half of screening. So there's all different variations of that. My concern again goes back to this: when you're outsourcing the background, and there have been some shortcuts taken here. Again, it goes back to this rush to get it done. The shortcut we saw, I have people telling me that some of the officers hired here in Sarasota County were actually sworn in at their first day on the job at the school. That's another red flag to me that goes off. If that officer is arriving at the school for the very first time, pinning that badge on at a school, where is there a field training officer process? Now, I know they said they had one, but it's hard to establish a field training officer process when none of those officers have ever worked here before. So it does raise some red flag questions.
Let me just tell you about some of the lengths that I've seen them go through to try to interrupt the background investigation. Lie detector tests, taking a Tuminol, smoking some marijuana, and putting a thumbtack in your shoe to interfere with the galvanic skin response in a lie detector, okay? Things of that sort. So I've seen the lie detector. There's a drug out there where, of course, we test their urine for the presence of drugs. There was a drug out there that you could take that cleanses the system so you don't come up positive for drugs.
Right. So the other thing is that, you know, hiring the SROs or creating your own police force or hiring guardians is not a panacea to the problem that we're facing here in terms of school shootings. Is that not right, Kurt?
No, you're right, because you know, you look back at the history of the past 10 years, a significant number of the school shootings we had officers on campus at the time the shooting took place. Now, I'm a solid supporter of the school police program, as I said, and I even believe school district policing itself can be very, very effective if done right. And I said that even before this county took that on. I said if we move it out of the sheriff's department and out of the police department's hand, create a police department with the right timing, it can be very effective. And I had suggested at the time that why not look at year one, just getting your infrastructure and your foundation in place, hire your chief, get your sergeants, your staff, create your policies and procedures, create your field training officer process, then move into year two about getting your officers on board.
Right, and Anthony, I mean, we are in the transitional phase here, and at least in Sarasota County, where the sheriff's office still has a role to play in terms of school safety here, but starting next year, it moves all over to this new police department. It's going to be on their shoulders, and a lot more has to be done.
Absolutely, and I think background checks and hiring the right people, and organizing the effort so that you have single points of entry, single points of exit, okay? The less people you need, more training when it comes to that single point of entrance, I think is important. Having tabletop exercises, so when you do have an active shooting situations, it's not for the first time.
We only have a couple seconds left, but Kurt, I want to ask you, is there any ongoing conversation between your organization and Sarasota or Manatee in terms of what we should be doing to make sure that nothing bad happens here? No,
we've had a number of folks from Manatee County attend our trainings in the past. We just did a statewide training in Orlando, which brought up over 1,000 officers together from all over the country. Manatee County did participate in that training. They've been very aggressive to reach out and want to do everything. Unfortunately, I live here in Sarasota County, and I've not seen those folks there.
Bad. All right, we're going to be talking about this more. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We want to thank our guest, Kurt Lavarello, the Executive Director of the School Safety Advocacy Council, and Anthony Shembri, the former head of Juvenile Justice in Florida.